Okay, folks, we've reached that point in our lives where, like everybody else on the internet, I have to voice my opinions on this show. Here's the thing I'm going to make abundantly clear before we get started. This video is not a rant about me talking about how woke or shitty or uncool Velma is. So if you're here waiting for me to just talk shit about this show, you're not getting that. Do I love this show? No. But I'm not going to sit here and be an asshole screaming about it on the internet, because there's a lot to unpack with this show and a lot of things to dive into to talk about. So don't expect me screaming being wokeness is destroying our televisions, because it's not. I'm also not going to be defending this show. This is going to be, I don't know how long of a video, just me talking about Velma, because this is a show that deserves to be talked about, which is such a weird thing to say about a cartoon on HBO Max aimed for adults. I mean, it's so weird to me that we're here and this has become one of the most divisive, most critically maligned shows of all time. Like, I haven't heard a lot of positive things about it, if I've heard any. The things I've seen that were positive about it are like stands of the characters or like the voice actors who are defending it. Nobody's really like, this is the peak of television and cinema. Nobody's really saying that about Velma. And I get it. Because, honey, it's not. It's really not. So I guess we should kind of just start by going back to where this began. Do you remember when HBO Max launched and they were like, we're doing a bunch of stuff. One of the things we're doing is we're working with Mindy Kaling. Her production company is going to be developing a Scooby-Doo cartoon focused on the character of Velma. It's going to be adult and aimed for adult audiences. And it's going to be really wickedly cool. And something I have always said is yeah, making Scooby-Doo aimed for adults works. It's kind of like what I wish Riverdale was. I really wish you did the Riverdale tone the earlier seasons with the cast of the Scooby-Doo gang, because I'm there's so much more to explore there. There's actually a history and mysteries and murders taking place in that universe instead of the Riverdale ones. So doing that, I'm yeah, I can buy that. I mean, an adult animated Scooby-Doo show. Okay, that's a good idea. It's going to have the tone and the style of Harley Quinn. That's a cool idea, because that is a nice looking show with really good character designs, great representation. I like that. And then they're Velma's going to be modeled after Mindy Kaling, be this Indian character. I'm yeah, I guess that makes sense. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I was never someone who's you can't change the color of a character or the ethnicity of a character because it's sacrilegious to do so. I don't think that at all. I think it's fine to change characters for that. They showed off some stills, and I'm okay, this looks solid enough. I have no complaints so far. Dead girl with her brains out. Okay, that's kind of fun. Bunch of people naked in a shower. Okay, that's kind of fun if we're doing that kind of a thing. We see the other characters, and it's okay, yeah, Fred, Glenn Howerton, I see that. Okay, Constance Wu is Daphne. Okay. The biggest point of contention was Sam Richardson as Norville. He's not called Shaggy. Now, we'll get into it a little bit more. One of the things I fully believe is that Shaggy should always be a parody of, the generation he's a part of. So when you're in the 60s, he's a hippie, counterculture drug user, right? That makes sense. When they did Scooby Apocalypse a couple years back, he was this stupid hipster with the perfect shaved beard and everything. I don't know what we're trying to say with Norville in this show, so I don't think he's really a parody of the culture. He's just Sam Richardson, but we'll get into it later. We see the stills for those characters, and I'm oh, the animation kind of looks off on some of them. They don't really match in terms of style. And then the biggest thing to me was we're not doing Scooby-Doo, and I'm oh, how come, Which I can see from a logistical standpoint how this is a realistic world and a talking dog doesn't fit into that world. So not seeing the show beforehand, I'm okay, I get what you're going for. No Scooby-Doo? Okay, I can buy that a bit. And then the show comes out. It is 10 episodes. They dropped them in 2-episode segments because they could not support this for 10 weeks. I'm sorry. I don't think the audience would have survived 10 weeks of this. Dropping it in episodes of 2 worked. It remained the number one show for a long time. I think when The Last of Us came out, it might have beaten it, but people were hate watching the show. And I'm if you hate it so much, don't watch it. Don't hate watch this, because that's how we get more of it. I've said this at the top and I'll say it again. There's nothing to defend in the show for the egregious things it does. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's the worst show I've ever seen. It surely isn't. But I cannot defend what this show does. There are certain elements I do enjoy. There are certain elements that I think are worth exploring. But everything about like what this show is saying, I just think is kind of annoying. So I do want to kind of start with what it's saying, which kind of sucks. When we get to the first episode, it bombards us with like, if this was like an adult TV show, we'd see more nudity and violence, and look at how dumb we are. So it wants to be self-aware and meta in this way, and it's trying to do that effectively. There are times where I think it works, where it's like, hey, Norville doesn't do drugs, okay? That kind of stuff is funny, but then it's also like, if this was a worse TV show, we'd flash back to this moment and we'd cut away in the flashback because that shows like, cinematic prowess or something. And that's where I'm like, you can't do that. You cannot call this thing out and then still do it in an ineffective way. It feels angry that it exists. And that's one of my biggest criticisms about this show, is that when it's trying to be meta in its jokes, it sounds like nobody involved in the production is actually having a good time. They have to call it out or they have to say these things. So if you're not having a good time calling those out or saying the jokes, why make them in the first place? Because you clearly have other jokes you are telling here. There's other funnier jokes you are saying with the characters and stuff. Why do you have to if I was like a teenage girl in one of these stupid shows, I would be getting so killed right now. It's like, because I'm hot, I'm a victim. Like, why are you making that the central joke if you don't look like or protrude like you want to make that joke? It's so weird. So nothing about this show feels like the creatives behind it are genuinely interested in telling a Scooby-Doo show. It's more like Mindy Kaling or her team or whoever the writers were had like, again, I don't want to blame this solely on Mindy, so we'll get to that in a minute here. It feels like everyone involved wanted to make like a parody show of this world, of like, we're going to parody Riverdale and old school Scooby-Doo stuff, like exactly what that tone's gonna be. But then someone at HBO is like, why don't we just make that a new Scooby-Doo show? And they're like, why? And it's like, because it's funny. And so they do that, and then it doesn't have the tone or feel of a Scooby-Doo or Mystery Gang cartoon or world. It has this angry effect that it hates that it's existing. That all blends together to this mismatch of bullshit that doesn't work for anything. It doesn't feel good. And that kind of sucks, because you're like, there's stuff to play with here that is genuinely compelling, but you're not doing it right. The meta jokes don't work. It's gratuitous identity of like, look how sex and raunchy we could be, does it for a minute and then doesn't do it at all. And then just becomes kind of lazy in how it's presenting those things, where every character is either like horned up or lazy, or it's just not interesting. And those jokes don't work. Now, there are some jokes that do land for me. There are some jokes where I'm like, this is kind of funny. You are saying something that is funny. Norville being like a food vlogger who does stuff on like streams, that's a funny joke. I like the stuff when they reference Casey Kasem, or when Fred and Norville are running through like these doors, like, this is breaking the law of physics, and then they cut back and they're in a fun house, so they're okay with it. Those are fun jokes they're playing with. I do like those things, and they work. There are references to other Hanna-Barbera era cartoons. Captain Caveman gets a play. The Flintstones gets a play. Side note for a minute, where's that Bedrock show from Elizabeth Banks? That was supposed to come out to HBO Max too, where Pebbles is an adult, but we don't have that. Where is that? I want that more than I want Velma. So those kind of jokes, they work. And I'm like, that's kind of funny. You're actually saying something about your world. Like, that's a Scooby-Doo adjacent tone. You want to modern Scooby-Doo up for general audiences, you can do it that way. It's not a big deal, but I do have to make this apparent. If you're using Scooby-Doo characters, why can't you use Scooby-Doo? I'm seeing the tone of this show. It's a comedy for adults about stupid stuff that doesn't have any real good jokes in it. You telling me you couldn't find a way to shove Scooby-Doo in there? I came up with a couple just the other day. One, some of the characters just have dogs. One of them just has a Great Dane that looks like Scooby-Doo. How hard is that to say Fred owns a dog, Velma owns a dog? How hard is that? You know? Another one. Just make Scooby snacks of food in the world, and Scooby is the mascot, and then we find out that like the Scooby Snacks Corporation is doing some of the mystery stuff in the town, and they have to let the dog go, and at the end of the season somebody gets Scooby. How hard is that? Or 3, Velma has panic attacks every episode. Maybe in her panic attack, her dog talks to her. And she's like, why is my dog talking? And why is it talking with a weird lisp thing? How hard is any of that to do? It all fits in with the tone that the show is presenting. So don't sit here and tell me you couldn't find a way to introduce a dog into this show. Because no character is realistic. Every character is like a parody of a character or a parody of a parody. None of the parents are well written. And I get that. The thing I can't believe I'm going to say this. The thing that Riverdale did really good was give its parents the identity of an older generation back in this town. All of them have feelings and emotions they are dealing with. The parents in this show are all terrible. Fred's parents, wealthy assholes. Velma's dad ignores her at every turn for his new wife. You know, Norville's parents, they are fine. The most with depth, I guess. Kind of like a cuck and a beta guy. Daphne's parents are the worst in my opinion because you have Jane Lynch and Wanda Sykes doing these incredibly weird impressionistic versions of themselves, like these extreme butch ladies who are really shitty cops. Who is that joke for? Is it for cops? Is it for lesbians? Is it for Wanda Sykes and Jane Lynch? Like, what are we doing? That to me was the first time like, oh, you clearly aren't trying to be serious, so why should I take you seriously? If you're not going to be serious, at least be funny. And you're not being funny with those characters. But let's talk about those characters, because this is a big deal for a lot of people. The characters we have to talk about. Let's start with Velma. I kind of talked about it already. Mindy Kaling is doing the voice of Velma Dinkley. Let's get this out of the way. She is not a writer on the show. If you are mad at her for the direction or writing this is taking, it's not her fault. She is not a writer. She is a producer, which I think means that's how they got her to get a bigger paycheck for the show. That's all she is, okay? Now, again, I am a white male, so my knowledge and my love of Mindy Kaling is not the same as other people. I've never fully hated her, but I've also never done like a deep dive into her catalog. I have seen some complaints online from East Indian women, talking about how Mindy Kaling depicts those women and women of that ethnicity as like these disgusting women who can never be like fundamentally or like, you know, actually attractive because of how they are and how society views them. And I'm like, okay, that's an actual complaint I can understand this show is saying. And like the audience that would be affected by that is complaining about, it's like, oh, another Mindy Kaling project where like the Indian woman can't be seen as like beautiful or like this standard of beauty because of how she is. And she's this ugly beast. And they don't do anything to counteract that, where there are literal jokes where it's like, because of how Velma looks, she isn't popular, the town hates her, you know, she only gets sympathy when she dresses up like a man and people start to take her seriously. She is so ugly, she has to train the hot girls to look uglier so they're not targeted. And that stuff is not funny and is very I mean, if I was an Indian woman, and again, I'm not, I would be very annoyed if like that's your go-to for this character, where it's like, she's smart, but everyone in the town thinks she's ugly and sucks and nobody likes her. And that's the other problem I have with this show, is Velma is not a well-written character, but every other lead falls in love with her. So throughout the entire course of this show, Norville has a huge crush on her, Daphne has a huge crush on her, and Fred has a huge crush on her, but she is a terrible person. Through every incarnation, she has no respect for other people. When she tries to learn to care about other people, she does a terrible job at doing that. She only thinks about herself. She talks down to everyone like she's so high and mighty. There's a reason nobody likes you. It's not because you're ugly. It's because you're an asshole to everyone and you think you're superior to them. And when you give us the 3 other leads in the Scooby-Doo world, simping for her at every turn, it's like, what are we doing? What are we saying here? Now look, I love the idea that the Scooby gang is poly and everyone's just dating everybody in the back of the Mystery Machine. I like that. But in those instances, Velma is kind of likable. In this show, it really sucks to say that your lead character is the most annoying character on your show, where every time she opens her mouth, she has something condescending to say to the beautiful girls or the police department or her friends, where Shaggy confesses his love or Norville, I should say, confesses his love and she laughs at him. Or when she doesn't think Fred is interesting, he's hot, like he looks hot, but he's so stupid she can't give him the time of day and she just uses people in her life. It's annoying. And yeah, if you've been somebody who's been negatively affected by the Mindy Kaling stuff, that's not going to help you have a better understanding of why she writes characters this way. So it just kind of sucks that like we have our first like Indian Velma and this is how she's portrayed as like this terrible, annoying person. It kind of sucks. It's actually, it would make me really mad, you know, if that's how I was seen or like how I was always depicted by this person who's supposed to be uplifting my ethnicity. You know, that kind of sucks. And that must feel bad. So that's really annoying. When Velma's the worst written character on the show, that sucks. Now let's talk about Norville for a minute. My second least favorite character on this show. He's not Shaggy. And look, I don't think there's anything problematic about how Shaggy was. It's not like every cartoon we saw him like, you know, ripping a bong. Like, why is it so hard to make this guy like a stoner? Like, this show is so against like drugs. They call them like jinkies and jeepers and rut-rows and, you know, all that crap. It's like, why? Why not just have him do it? You want to make him African American? Sure, that's fine, I guess. But you changed everything about this character that makes him his character. He solely becomes a Sam Richardson impersonator, if that makes sense, where it's like, we're going to make this character just a character Sam Richardson would play IRL, and that kind of sucks. So there's nothing really redeeming about Norville. I don't think he has anything Shaggy adjacent to him, and to me, that's like the fundamental change of that character. Velma is still smart. She still has like this mystery in her mind, but she's an asshole. There's still Velma in there. The sarcasm is just played up to the extreme, to the extreme, to the extreme. There is no Shaggy in Norville. Just a Sam Richardson impersonation. Fred, I get what they're doing. And in my opinion, Glenn Howerton's doing the best voice work because he's actually changing his voice to sound stupid. He's never been my first choice for Fred, but that's something he is doing. He's a spoiled rich boy who's acting like a baby half the time. He's played up the dumb factor a lot, which kind of is upsetting. You know, it's kind of like, okay, we get it. Like, we know these characters aren't, like, real. They're all hollow, so this is what Fred has become. It's kind of annoying. Frank Welker voices his dad, which makes me more excited than it should, because I'm like, oh, cool. Somebody who is associated with this world is here. You know, it's like, that shouldn't be how I feel, but it is. Fred's not a great written character. In my opinion, the best written of the gang is Daphne, because she actually learns a lesson, finds her footing, is allowed to grow as a character. She learns the most. She starts off as like the pretty girl, and she's like, I used to be good friends with Velma, and then we weren't good friends, but I still like her, and what is wrong with me where I like this person who's clearly against me at every turn? I have this burden on my shoulders trying to find my real parents. Am I actually a criminal? Is that why I act these ways? She is given more to play with than any other character. And in my opinion, Constance Wu as Daphne should have been the lead. You could call this Daphne, but I get why it's Velma. I get why it's Velma. But if this was Daphne, and like she's the lead, she's this adopted daughter trying to find her way in this world. She realizes like, oh, her friends who are like these popular girls are being killed. There's a mystery at that. Her best friend is like a mystery solver, and she's dueling between these identities. Like, does she stay this person who is complicit and potentially a victim, or does she learn this lesson and go for Fred, and maybe her boyfriend Fred learns a lesson that way too? That's more interesting than what they did with Velma. And the plot with Velma is she has these massive panic attacks that are kind of played off for jokes sometimes, where it's just like, oh my god, I'm having my panic attack again, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Norville, say something stupid like you always do so I feel better. It's like, what, why? Why is that the joke? I know it's a comedy, but it's not funny. Then the mysteries around her in the world, they are fine. Like, I don't think, like, that was, like, the main push for this show, which it should have been. It's like, someone's killing the popular girls. Like, that's a fun premise for, like, them just starting out. And then it just becomes, like, this really weird mystery where everything's, like, connected and all leads back to this, like, one thing and this other thing. And if it was just more, like, standalone mysteries, that could be more fun. But having, like, this overarching theme of Velma dealing with this crap, it kind of affects the show. And not in a really strong way. So that kind of just sucked. I don't know. There's not much to like about the show. I don't think the writing is strong. I don't think the characters are strong. It hates itself for having to say these things and exist. The animation is fine. I think you can really see the moments where like there was more money put into that specific moment as opposed to the ones where there wasn't, and that can become annoying. Overall, I do like the colors of the show. They are very vibrant, like the use of like oranges and blues. It looks really well. And that's fun. The art direction's very strong. The characters are all distinctive and unique. For some reason, we're doing like an Arlie Ermy impression as like the sheriff of the town. Like, who is that for? I'm sorry, but is that for anybody under the age of 20? I know your target demographic is like older, but you're playing this show off where it's like younger people who watch Riverdale. Who in Riverdale, like who watches Riverdale knows Arlie Ermy? I'm sorry, I'm not a normal person, so I know what you're doing, but what are we doing? You know, I'm just like, there's so many specific things you're doing that aren't funny. There's one joke about like a government like organization or like a peacekeeping thing that's like, they were called Scooby. And it's like, you know, like the secret whatever. And then Velma's like, what did Scooby do? That sounded dumb. Or when it's like, somebody wrote Jinkies on this paper. Jinkies, that's such a stupid word. If you don't like Scooby-Doo, why make this Scooby-Doo? Why? We could make it something else. I'm not going to say it'd get better numbers, but you're getting people hate watching instead of actually like caring about your show. And I don't think this is entirely bad. Some of the jokes land. Sometimes the animation is fun. There is enough to care about if it tried harder. So, well, I don't think this is like the woke agenda did it again and ruined Scooby-Doo. I think it's more like, if nobody wanted to make this, why did we make it? Why does it feel like it hates itself for existing with these really bad interpretations of this world? Very strange. But if there's an audience for it, I'm cool with that. If we get another season, which I think we will because it's like a #1 show on HBO Max, I'll support that. I think like if we have to get through this rough first season to fully find what we're going to do in the second one, okay, I can get behind that. I cannot sit here and recommend the show to you. I don't know if there's enough good stuff to justify its existence. What I can say is there's no Scooby-Doo, so why are you watching the Scooby-Doo show? So Velma, season 1, I am going to give a 3 out of 10. Now, thank you guys for watching this review. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Hive, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around this long. I promise it's not always like this. Have fun, stay safe, good luck.